I've been tempted to make a video on India and the rise of Modi for a long time now, but what kept me from it is the fact that I'm a dirty Paki, and anything that I say is going to be looked at it from that angle.
I want you to tell the people of India how shameless you've become. Tell them.
But then I looked at my subscribers. They're not watching my stuff anyways. The only people that watch this show or listen to the podcast are exclusively into ripping bongs in suburban Australia and watching reruns of Q&A with Tony Jones. Wait, is that just me? So here goes. Every media outlet looks at the rise of Modi and his right-wing nationalist ideology from a prism of Islamophobia. I'm not denying that his politics does not look at Muslims favorably, but that's not what motivates it. At the heart of Indian social politics lies an invisible beast called a caste system. I don't think it's fair to say that there has been a debate about the origins of the caste system, but in fact arguments. Huge arguments that I'd rather not get into for my own delicate sanity. However, there are largely two schools of thought. One that believes historic invasions through Central Asia of northerners interacting with indigenous South Asians from a position of military supremacy gave the birth to the caste system. The second school of thought rejects the idea that it was northerners but believes the system was developed in ancient India and was not influenced by the invasions or migrations but social needs at the time. What often people get wrong about the caste system is that they compare it to the modern class system prevalent in the rest of the world today. I mean, that's partly true, but there are stark differences. Caste system is hereditary, which means that you can't change it. So what it essentially is, it's a large-scale division of labor with zero social mobility. Confused? Let me explain. The caste system has a 5-tier hierarchy, 4 known and 1 invisible. At the top are the Brahmins, known as the priestly caste, or in my opinion more accurately, the intellectual caste. This was the class of people that in addition to being priests were the intellectual muscle of the ruler, akin to what Aristotle was to Alexander. Although this is the caste at the top of the social hierarchy, but in terms of wealth and power, significantly dependent on the second caste in the hierarchy. Kshatriyas, known as the warrior caste, but better understood as the ruling class. This class of people are the rulers and warriors, but more importantly, the only caste of people able and allowed to accumulate free capital and exercise political authority. Third on the ladder are Vaishya, or the merchant caste, the lowest of the upper caste Hindus. They are given the duties to trade, lend money, and cultivate land, as well as expected to gain knowledge related to commerce. So they, in practice, become the business and the banking class. Although the wealth generation came from this caste, their mullahs was always at the mercy of the ruling caste. They did not have permanent property rights and were restricted to hoard precious metals that the ruling caste could confiscate at any point. Their inheritance, too, was at the discretion of the ruling caste. The fourth and the lowest of the traditional castes are the Shudras, manual laborers that form the basis of the working class. Then are the lowest of the low, the untouchables, a classless group of people excluded from the 4-tier caste system that the other castes would choose to ignore. As a consequence, they are relegated to worst jobs that no other caste deems fit to perform, like handling waste and feces. They are now known as Dalits. Because untouchables is a bit on the nose. For thousands of years in ancient India, this division of labor dictated politics. The ruling caste had the power, the Brahmin caste or the intellectual caste provided them with the guidance required, and the merchant caste provided them with the wealth required to govern and conquer. This strict division of labor throughout history and continues to play an integral role in India's social political development. It's as important to their politics as Shuis are to Australian. From 12th century onwards, sustained Muslim migrations and conquests of India added a whole new group of people into the mix. As conquerors, the Muslims either defeated the rulers of India, i.e. the warrior caste, or formed alliances with them to govern, fitting perfectly into the existing structure of hierarchy by replacing the ruling caste with themselves and continue to enjoy the support of Brahmins and Vaishyas. They were prudent enough not to mess with the existing structure too much and enjoyed the wealth and power that came with it. The caste-based social structure began to change with the British colonization of India. The British entered India in the 1600s as traders and by the 1700s took advantage of a declining Muslim rule by slowly taking over the country. Like the Muslims before them, they adjusted themselves into the ruling class of Indian social structure. But they brought with them a whole set of new ideas. Ideas like nationalism, democracy, and socialism. These ideas will affect the politics of India for years to come. In addition to this, the Brits brought ridiculously thin mustaches that for some reason are still huge in India. But two ideas in particular will change the entire balance of this caste system: agricultural property rights and electoral representation. The British had one major objective of occupying India: the economic extraction to fuel the rapidly expanding British Empire. And for that, they needed some local support. Like the ruling classes before them, the British naturally found the best local support for them amongst the merchant caste and the intellectual caste, readily willing to offer services like they had before. Soon the commerce caste became the arms of the British Empire that fueled the Industrial Revolution with the raw materials desperately needed. However, this time it was different. The British for the first time brought with them the idea of permanent property ownership, wealth that could not be arbitrarily confiscated. The merchant caste that previously were at the mercy of the ruling class now began to accumulate large amounts of wealth and property. With this came newfounded power. The intellectual caste, due to their academic head start, were able to educate themselves with British education and were in the best position to handle menial administrative roles, as long as they had really thin mustaches. That's not true, but I wish it was. Anyhow, these two castes, the Brahmins or the intellectual caste, and Vaishyas, the merchant caste, with their newfounded wealth and ideas, began to demand bigger and bigger pieces of the pie from the British, and eventually the entire pie, meaning, get the hell out of our country. But how do they convince the British to cede power when militarily they are far superior? By giving them a lesson on democracy and nationalism. They formed India's first mainstream political party, the Indian National Congress. Interestingly, the Congress Party's two leading figureheads of the anti-colonial movement at the time, Gandhi and Nehru, represent this alliance of the two castes perfectly, as Gandhi belonged to the merchant caste and Nehru the intellectual. Now here's the issue. The newly enlightened upper caste Indians are looking to gain legitimacy through democracy. Vote of the people. Have you seen a problem over here? We're almost at the end of decolonization of India in this video, and we haven't spoken about the lower castes. That's because they never mattered. In this grand display of grabbing power from one hand to the other, they were irrelevant. The Shudras or the working class were probably picking cotton, and the Dalit or the untouchables cleaning sewage, completely disinterested in what religion the guy who they have to pick cotton for is and what color his skin is. They are destined to have a life of incredible misery sanctioned by their fate. So now, how do the upper caste Brahmins and Vaishyas convince the majority of the people in India, neglected and abused throughout history, to come out and show their strength to overthrow the British? The upper caste found religion and nationalism to be the only ideas strong enough to mobilize the neglected masses. For the first time, the identity of the ruler became important for the lower castes. This effort of the upper caste was successful in kicking out the British, but the mix of national identity in Indian politics brought with it negative byproducts. With the Muslims of India who over the years had morphed themselves into the caste system, demanding their own country and breaking off India's two limbs, forming Pakistan in 1947. In an independent India, with the entire ruling class of British gone, the intellectual caste and the merchant caste develop a power-sharing alliance, with the Brahmins dominating politics with a strong socialist leader Nehru, and the merchant caste dominating business affairs of the state with marginal involvement in legislation. Nehru, in a newly independent India, in addition to being the prime minister, was considered the figurehead of the country after Gandhi's assassination in 1948, and as a result, enjoyed immense public support. Leading the Congress Party, he started to implement quasi-socialist policies that the Brahmins believed would be popular amongst the mass lower castes and will keep them in power for years to come. Initially, this policy was popular amongst the merchant caste, as their businesses were in desperate need for government spending in public infrastructures like highways, power plants, and industry building. but soon started to advocate privatizations once the industry was established for them to take over. The merchant caste lacked the political support of the lower caste to revolt and overthrow Nehru. However, over time, new parties started to develop that represented the interests of the merchant caste. One such party was the BJP, whom Modi is currently the leader of. Nehru's Congress party maintained its rule even after his death, although less popular. This was in part because the socialist policies had the effect of keeping Indian corporate sector dominated by the merchant caste on a strict leash. In 1991, the Congress party's quasi-socialist policies hit a dead end. The Indian economy faced a dire crisis. The Brahmin-dominated polity realized their inevitable downfall if things don't change. They implemented large-scale liberalization of the economy, abandoning the socialist principles of the founding father Nehru. This bought the Congress party time, but the biggest beneficiary of the new economy was the merchant caste. In this new capitalist India, power followed money, and BJP, representing the merchant caste, started to win elections in coalitions with other smaller parties with similar interests. Brahmin control of politics was starting to show its vulnerabilities. In 2014, a right-wing nationalist, neoliberal, Nehru-hating politician of the merchant caste is elected with a strong political mandate. Is he the right guy to completely overtake Indian politics and overthrow the ruling Brahmin elite? That's what Indian big business believes. They supported his election with record funding and media attention. Needless to say, the corporate media in India is owned by the merchant caste. So if Modi's entire agenda is to dethrone the Brahmin ruling elite, why does he hate Muslims so much? Modi, like the rulers of India before him, knows that nationalism is the only force potent enough to bring about this change. And hating on Muslims just comes as a byproduct of this deal. Again, how do you convince the lower caste that despite living in the fifth richest country in the world, still survive in the worst human conditions possible to overthrow one bourgeois class for another? Fill them with nationalistic emotions to hate non-Hindus. Just look at the recent issues dominating world headlines. Last year, Modi passed a legislation that allowed Hindu migrants living in eastern India illegally to be eligible for citizenship. The bill excludes Muslim migrants that are also in large numbers. Indian citizenship law excludes Muslims and not Hindus. That's world news. But what it also does is give millions of low-caste Hindu migrants from Bangladesh citizenship. The best democratic base for Modi to alter caste makeup of eastern India and break Brahmin control of the region. Modi, representing the merchant caste interest, believes that the best way for India to become a truly advanced industrial country worthy of its population size is by getting rid of the baggage that the Brahmin class is carrying with their outdated ideas of the past and overturn long-practiced economic policies devised by Nehru and the Congress. India, like I mentioned before, is the fifth richest country in the world, with a GDP that is nearing $3 trillion, but is also the lowest in the Human Development Index at 129th compared to all the other G20 nations. According to estimates, close to 80% of the country's wealth is controlled by the top 1%. This statistic, unfortunately, is not rare in the rest of the world, but it is criminal in India, where 40% of Indian children today are malnourished. Now, considering Prime Minister Modi, you're a subscriber of mine, I'm going to address you directly. The problem with Indian economy isn't Brahmin control. It's the caste system itself. Advanced industrial capitalist countries like the US depend on social mobility and entrepreneurship between the classes for wealth creation. If the majority of your population is destined to be in the lower classes as a birthright, you are underutilizing your economy. If you're an Indian and you don't agree with what I'm saying, just make a list. Make a list of your billionaires and tally them with what caste they belong to, and make a list of random 20 to 25 janitors and sewage cleaners and tally them with what caste they belong to. You will see a pattern. If you free these people, imagine the potential your country has. The caste system must have some advantages. That's why it's survived thousands of years. But at the same time, this resilient system is keeping you down. And just as a side note, it is brutal to its lower castes.